welcome to the panel discussion of how to make fake drugs. I'm Sarah Hodges from the University of Warwick, and I'd like to introduce you to our panelists today, who are all part of a research project which has, for the past 3 years, looked into the question of fake drugs and the global pharmaceutical supply chain. First, we have Dr. Zoe Goodman, who is a research fellow and my colleague at the University of Warwick. Hello, Zoe. Zoe joins us today from Mombasa in Kenya, where she's currently undertaking research. Next, we have Professor Julia Hornberger, who joins us today from Johannesburg, where she's a professor in anthropology at the University of the Witwatersrand and also a key member of our research team. Next, we have Dr. Ushe Kufakuranani, who joins us today from Harare in Zimbabwe, where he's also currently undertaking research for the project. And finally, we have Dr. Nishpriya Thakur, who joins us today from Lucknow in India, where she's currently undertaking research for the project. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining me. It's wonderful to see you all from your international locations. I wonder if any of our audience members have joined us also, might like to share where they are speaking from, or rather viewing from. Please go ahead and pop that in the chat. So our aims for this hour is to share some of our research with the audience, and also to give you a sense of the nature of what fake drugs as a problem is like. And so to start that, we thought we'd each share with you a recipe for what we found in our research for how to make fake drugs. And so audience members, I would love it if you have any sense of how fake drugs are made, just before we get into our own investigations and what we've uncovered. So please feel free, even as people are talking, to just pop stuff into the chat. So in the same order that people were introduced in, I think I'll just go around and ask you one by one. Dr. Zoe Goodman, would you like to start with your recipe for how to make fake drugs?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. So I think one of the things that has come up in a lot of our field sites is that one of the things you really need in order to make fakes is long histories of prejudice, right? Fakes, we've found, really attach to particular places and to particular people that people already have sort of long-standing grudges against, in a sense. And I think we could all probably think of the globally held association between China and Chinese people and fake stuff as very, very much related to a kind of worldwide prejudice against Chinese people, right? At the same time, as all of us know, prejudices are often extremely localized. They're often geographically and historically specific. So one of the things that we're doing in the project is really trying to figure out what some of those prejudices might be locally and how they conjure and mobilize fakes with them. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm doing research in Mombasa in Kenya. And I've been here just over a week, actually. And one of the stories that I've heard several times already is that around fake vaccines is that actually Israel is creating fake COVID vaccines, right?
And is this true?
That well, let me tell you a little story that one of my good friends in Mombasa told me a few days ago. I was sitting in his tea shop, and basically he told me that he had heard that a lot of the COVID vaccines were actually not real, that they were fake, and that they had been produced by the Israeli state in order to really reduce the Muslim population. This was his words: reduce the Muslim population globally, both in Mombasa and worldwide. And this might seem like a very odd story to many of our listeners. Is Israel really producing fake vaccines? Like, other people thought that. And actually, though, when you make in the context of Mombasa, this story makes a lot of sense. Basically, Mombasa, unlike the rest of Kenya, is Muslim and has been for over 1,000 years. And essentially, the sort of the Kenyan government's anti-terrorism policy has really focused on imprisoning, disappearing, killing Muslim Mombasans, right? And although these kind of gratuitous and everyday forms of violence are really carried out by the Kenyan state, actually Muslims in Mombasa have long seen Israel as the kind of apex of a sort of global Islamophobia in many ways, right? And so I think this story about fake vaccines in Mombasa really stems quite easily from a well-established and long-existing sort of sense of suspicion towards Israel, right? So I think this is one
I just
example.
want to stop you there. You're saying,
Sure.
talking about suspicion, but surely fake drugs are a problem, aren't they? I mean, are dangerous? Shall we pause
so
there?
I think that's one of the things.
Yeah. Unless you're about to go on more. We have a little bit of a delay. Thank you, audience.
No?
Okay. So, Julia, Beth, can you unmute Julia? Because she's having a bit of background noise there. Thank you. And Julia, what's your, so Zoe's recipe for how to make fake drugs has been the question of pre-existing prejudice, that actually fake drugs only can exist, or perhaps there's a preponderance of their existence or claims about them when there's pre-existing stereotypes about other kinds of people coming from outside. Julia, do you want to unmute yourself and talk about what your recipe is for fake drugs that you've found in your research? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm happy to add to that. And I think prejudices never work, always need a kind of portion of good imagination as well, as you know, not in a positive way, but in a negative way. But I'm arguing here, or what I want to show here today is really one thing you definitely need is a sense of imagination. So I'm going to tell a little story which reaches from the WHO in the 90s to some recent kind of workshops about police training in Southern Africa. And I'm going to quickly read this out so we have it in a nice and compact way. For a long time at the WHO level, the idea of fake drugs, as in counterfeit drugs, was more of an afterthought. In 1988, some delegates at the 41st World Health Assembly had managed to get the issue into a resolution about the rational use of drugs. They had done so by referencing the work of the UN Commission of Narcotic Drugs, bringing to the attention of the Assembly the criminal element involved in the faking of drugs. Still, WHO experts and its secretariat struggled to get their project regarding fake drugs off the ground. They faced a lack of interest and a lack of support from member states and possible collaborators. This was to change in 1992. In 1992, the WHO, for the first time, put a number to the problem of fake drugs. WHO expert Valerio Reggi rather ironically remembers, and all the estimates about the extent of the problem of fake drugs are purely casual, he says. In the beginning, the first statement about the famous 10% was pure magic. But then 10% was what actually triggered the conference. Somebody invented the 10% just to get interest. It was actually one of our colleagues. He came up with this 10% and gave it away to journalists. WHO says 10% of drugs are counterfeited. And then all of a sudden, the interest in this thing came up. Otherwise, he would have not gotten the money for doing the work. He laughs. That was fantastic, he remembers. Based on this money flow and newly sparked interest, the pharma industry, the WTO, Interpol, and the WHO organized their first comprehensive conference in which everybody agreed that fake drugs were an urgent threat to health. From there on, it was smooth sailing, and efforts to police fake medication accelerated drastically. And so did the sense of imagination. Many years later, at an Interpol workshop, at which Southern African police officers were to be trained how to police fake medications, one of the participants shared his experience of a raid on fake drugs with his group, which his group had carried out in Tanzania. He showed the group a photo of policemen entering a small informal shop with rickety packed shelves and a woman standing behind the counter. He explained, we went into one of these stores in Dar es Salaam and there was some stuff detected. He adds, here you can imagine buying some counterfeit Viagra. This triggered his fellow officers to break out in raucous laughter. I don't want to imagine the results, he adds, alluding to the shame a man could face if the expected erection failed to appear. This is what did the convincing that policing fake drugs should be a priority, to imagine rather than to know that they are fake drugs. In this example, of course, the imagination is especially vivid as the idea of fake Viagra produces a strong affective reaction of hilarity and outrage among the men of the law, pushing them without much further thinking towards taking action. And so we can conclude, to make fakes, it takes some magic numbers, it takes some intimations about the presence of fake drugs in already suspicious outlets, spiced up importantly by a good, as in provocative, dramatic, or hilarious story, which helps to gloss over the lack of evidence otherwise.
Wow, Julia, that's quite a story. So, are you saying that claims about fake drugs, even by the World Health Organization, are actually invented?
I think that the making of statistics at the beginning of it was definitely a tool to create awareness. I know that the WHO has struggled ever since to compile numbers about cases because the cases from coming from different countries were of such diverse nature that they would never be able to be summed up. They were anecdotal, they were about different kind of drugs. It wasn't necessarily counterfeited, it wasn't necessarily criminal, it wasn't necessarily substandard. So actually, to come up with a clear sheet of evidence has been until impossible for the WHO. And I think they, at one point, they even said, we're not going to try any longer to do so.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a bit of a shock, but fascinating. Thank you very much. Let's turn now to Dr. Ushewedu Kufakornani, who is talking about his research in Harare. Ushe, you are, now you've unmuted yourself. Right. So according to your research, how does one make fake drugs?
So for me, fake drugs are a combination or a result of informality. So when you get into an informal space, already that becomes a space that is unregulated. It is outside the radar of formal scrutiny, so to speak, and it becomes a space of suspicion. And then you multiply that with what I think is a problematic and not so relevant, laws or regulations around sex tonics specifically, or sex drugs, which is what I am specifically working on. And so these ingredients make the space itself a space of substandard, suspicious drugs. People have questions about their efficacy, and so forth and so forth. More so because there's a law that is in place that has banned their over-the-counter selling. So that combination itself allows for, fake talk, suspicions of fake medicine, without necessarily having evidence that demonstrate scientific evidence that demonstrate that in these species there are fake sex tonics that are circulating. So that is the
Okay.
ingredient.
Which is, just to sum up, the informality.
Informality. And then you
All
bring
right.
suspicion
Into it. Got it. All right. So we have so far kind of prejudice against foreigners from Zoe. We have imagination and a willingness to confidently invent estimates from Julia. We have the question of informality, that's to say the context in which products are traded, plus suspicion. And Nishpriha, coming to us from Lucknow in India, what is your ingredient? What's your recipe that you found from your research and how to make fake drugs?
Thank you, Sarah. So, another ingredient I found that you need to make fakes is the confusion between quality of a product versus quality of its paperwork. So I'm going to share this conversation between me and my friend Sandeep and see how it changes the perception of the quality of a drug. One day, while talking to my friend Sandeep, I asked him if he can tell me about substandard drugs since he's in the pharmaceutical business. Substandard or sublegal? He asked me, raising his eyebrows. Having never heard of sublegal, I prodded Sandeep. What do you mean by that? I wanted to know about the common accusations by the World Health Organization, as well as the leading scientific scholarly journals about Indian drugs being substandard and causing pandemic in Africa. Sandeep told me, you mean fake medicines? Oh, no, no, no. Fake medicines, Indian medicines are top class. They're never fake. I know you're talking about that report by WHO from 2017 about substandard drugs. I said, oh, come on, Sandeep. I'm sure you don't disagree that substandard medicines are dangerous to health. And as WHO says, right? And I'm also sure that not all medicines from India are top class. Sandeep added sheepishly. Well, I agree with you. Yes, there are some fake medicines being sent by some pharmaceutical dealers in Delhi. I've heard about them in the pharma market. But I must tell you that when you say substandard, I hear sublegal. And not just me, you can speak with my other friends who are drug distributors of Indian pharmaceuticals in Africa, and they would say the same because most of the pharmaceuticals are labeled as substandard simply because they lack proper paperwork, their labels are not accurately printed, and sometimes they're simply substandard because the regulatory authorities were not paid enough or paid on time. I was confused. And so I asked, but Sandeep, you only get approvals from regulatory authorities if the drugs inside these packets are all right. Clearing some of my doubts, Sandeep told me, oh, not at all. In fact, many times the approvals are done even before the drugs are manufactured. Each of these drugs require a dossier, which is a collection of administrative documents that lists everything about the drug from its manufacturing site, stability conditions, marketing authorities, drugs usage, etc. And then this dossier is sent to the regulating authorities in the country where the drugs are to be exported. The regulating authorities sometimes visit the manufacturing site and enjoy the hospitality and give approvals, which are valid for 5 years. Many times the drugs lie at the port for customs clearance. Many times the drug reach right after 5 years. So the drugs still work perfectly fine, but then their approvals are not valid and therefore they are labeled as substandard. So, when we hear the term substandard, we know it means sublegal, which means to us that it has not cleared all the legal requirements. Sandeep is not the only distributor claiming this. As shared by other Indian traders and distributors in the pharmaceutical business, many times Indian drugs that are labeled as substandard are in fact caught in legal issues such as problems with dossiers, expiring approvals, drugs lying at the port for customs clearance, etc. While the move to separate and eliminate substandard drugs by WHO is to detect and prevent pandemics caused by consumption of substandard drugs, in practice it is more to do with the prevention of correct documents, correct labels, compared to the contents of the packets. In that sense, drugs are labeled as substandard a priori, even before they are manufactured, and not so because there is compromise in the quality of the medicines, but because in the quality of the paper. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's a little bit concerning. So it sounds like the person you met in the course of your research, Sandeep, doesn't actually believe in the problem of fake drugs, except for some mysterious person who may or may not exist in India's largest city. Is that the sense you
Yes,
got?
yes. In fact, he did not want to share, or maybe he shared that there are fake medicines, but that's not more concerning for him. It's more concerning for him that even the non fake medicines are considered substandard.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I think so far we've heard some extremely surprising and eye-opening results from your project. I'd like to turn now to the comments. Welcome, James from Birmingham, Caroline from Zimbabwe, Rory from Manchester. Thank you so much for popping in. Do any of you have any key questions? Yeah, Rory from Manchester, let's have you. Julia's point about magic numbers is insightful, you say. There are estimates of different things floating around in many pharma discussion, and it's hard to know what the basis for some is. Yes, and I will just share with the rest of the audience that Rory is someone who knows a huge amount about the international political economy of pharmaceutical trade. And so thank you so much for that insightful comment. I wonder if any of you might have anything to say also about something that I've heard, which is that fake drugs is a problem because fake drugs are mortally dangerous. That this is an urgent issue because drugs all kill us. Is this something that you have found evidence for in your respective research? And let's start just a kind of quick yes, no, and why in the same order. Zoe, anything from you? Are fake drugs dangerous? Are they going to kill us? Should I be worried?
Absolutely no empirical evidence so far, although I'll just tell you a little story. I went to an online seminar the other day hosted by some French pharmacists, and they were touting this extremely scary statement that, more people die in Africa from fake drugs than die from malaria. So it was this extremely sensationalist statement, and yet no empirical evidence to back it up. And I think that's exactly what many of us have seen in a lot of our different contexts, is whether we're going to online events or chatting with people, it's extremely huge and scary statements about fakes, but very little empirical evidence to actually back up those statements.
Okay, thank you, Zoe. So a big question mark about what is the empirical basis on which, for the past several decades, we have been warned and warned again about the urgent dangers that fake drugs present to our lives. All right, from Johannesburg, Julia Hornberger, what's your take on whether or not fake drugs are a problem and indeed they're about to strike us all dead?
Yeah, two answers to that. I think we should say that, in the work we're doing here, we struck by how many claims are out there about fake drugs. And so our research is not tasked with finding qualities and finding cases and detecting cases. So we're not going undercover and trying to find out if there are fake drugs or not. And then with that, we can also not really say if these fake drugs are lethal or not. But what we have found in this research is that to claim that fake drugs are lethal is a very powerful thing, because all of us have a very vivid imagination. And if we just imagine that we would go and buy fake antibiotics or we immediately think about ourselves and the effect it would have on us, and how terrible it would be as we trying to take something that was supposed to make us better is actually going to do the opposite to us. So there's a very powerful visceral feeling to this idea of fake drugs, which doesn't need much explaining, which immediately kind of provokes this idea of the danger and the urgent danger it poses to our bodies and to our families and to our nations as such. So as such, it's a very powerful signifier, which does very powerful work, evidence of it or not.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Kufukuranani, coming to us from Harare. What's your take on this? What does your research tell us?
Yes, so this is very interesting because even as I was researching, you have the state on the one hand already convinced that over-the-counter Sextonics have side effects that are negative. And in fact, one of the claims that were made at some point is that they had been hoodwinked by pharmacists, to believe that they were safe at some point and so forth, yet they were substandard, etc. And then they come up with a ban to over-the-counter Sextonics, which is quite unique in this part of the world, because elsewhere in the region, you don't have these bans. And then you ask people, you have people who you have suspicion, and because this trade has now gone into the informal space, that is emboldened claims to say, look, these are dangerous, look who is selling it, the people who are selling it, they are actually not licensed, and they don't have experience, the requisite experience. A pharmacist is trained and so forth, and they go through a process to understand medicine and so forth and so forth. And then these people are just, ordinary people, so to speak, who are in the streets and they're selling. And that already emboldens these suspicions that there's something wrong with this. But what it does is that in reality, and this is from my research, in reality, these people have sextonics that are in demand, and people are buying them, they are using them, and there are questions, of course, around the efficacy. But when you begin to investigate more, these questions around efficacy are not necessarily because of the drugs themselves, so to speak. Like any other chemical that you induce in, or that you check in into your body, including brand name drugs, they are likely to have side effects. All right, so these people understand that even when they sell you a specific drug, it may not be compatible with your system, and there are always alternatives that may be compatible to your system. And this is not peculiar to sextonics. I mean, as I've mentioned, brand name drugs do likewise. So the issue is not so much about the drugs themselves. It's now a bigger issue. The reason why there is this continued suspicion and so forth, you begin to think that it is also associated with sort of benefits that are accruing. These busts that take place tend to be very beneficial to state and non-state agents in some way, when people do the busts occasionally, and so forth. So it is very important that you have this continued existence of the trade under this suspicion, under this negative picture and so forth, so that certain, you know, certain things are possible. For example, it's possible to continue to do some official and non-official drug busts that at the end of the day become, cash cows for individuals. So this,
Okay. Yeah, that sounds
yes.
like there's actually quite a few different interests competing, and perhaps the only interest in town is not, in fact, the question of drug safety. Okay, and Nishpriha from Lucknow, briefly, what is your take on, the so-called problem of fake drugs?
So I was speaking to my friend Sandeep again yesterday, and he has just been fired by an Indian pharmaceutical company in Nairobi. And he said that they're not giving me my salary, they're not giving me any money. So I asked him, "What are you going to do?" He said, "What am I going to do? I'm going to defame them. I'm going to tell in the market that their drugs are fake." So I said, but these drugs are not fake. How can you say that? He said, a fake person can only make fake drugs. So sometimes it's not just the drugs that kill us. It's also all those fake people, fake countries that people perceive. Like Zoe said, it's the prejudice that can also kill us. So that's the danger of fake drugs.
Okay, well, that is a bit of an eye opener. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm just going to point out James Brown, coming to us from Grace Guide, Birmingham in the UK, raises the issue. He says, "This is all entirely new to me, but it sounds very uncertain as to the extent that this is a problem, and indeed you're underscoring that. What message would you have to people about whether or not they need to be concerned and what to look out for?" And I think this is particularly relevant in our current moment, perhaps when we're all completely alarmed about the question of COVID and to what degree things are fake or not. Dr. Goodman, I know that in your research you have looked carefully at the way in which the current pandemic, seems to bring in its wake a lot of concerns about fakeness. Is that something that you could speak to?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And thanks for the question, James. I think the thing that we really need to be aware of and to look out for in questions of fakeness is not so much a concern to global health, but is about power. In our research, I think what all of us are finding out in our different ways is that claims to fakeness are always acts of power. They're either an assertion of power of like government or business or the police, in Ushe's case, trying to either make money or assert power over others, whether citizens, traders, people in more marginalized positions, or, as in the case of the story of Israel that I was telling a few moments ago, it's an attempt to kind of try to challenge existing power dynamics, right? So I think the concern is not so much. I think one of the things that we really hope to come out of the project is to try to reassure consumers that actually, as far as we can tell from our extensive research in different contexts, there isn't actually that many fakes in circulation pharmacologically. Of course, I should, make the important caveat, as Julia has already done, we are not doing pharmacological testing. However, it seems to us that neither is anybody else. From a pharmacological perspective, we shouldn't be that concerned about fake drugs. However, it doesn't mean that there isn't a whole lot of things related to fakes that we should be concerned about, whether that's prejudice, money flowing in different directions, or patterns of kinds of marginalization that are indeed, structural and huge causes of concern. But the pharmacological and health element, so far, what we've uncovered is that is not particularly a source of concern.
Okay, we have a new question that's just come up. The question is, in Nigeria, fake drugs has been a burning issue for some time, and indeed you are correct. In the Nigerian context, fake drugs comprise substandard drugs and expired drugs as well. Both are prevalent health concerns in Nigeria. Julia, do you want to take that up, both in terms of providing a bit of context that your own research has pointed out as to the significance of Nigeria in the way that fake drugs as a problem has come onto the global agenda, and also how one makes sense of the different kinds of drugs or different kinds of categories through which the problem of fake drugs is understood.
Yeah, so I'm happy to, Nigeria is a very interesting case because it has two labels to it, which is one is where a place where indeed there's a lot of fake medication. And on the other hand, it's very well known for fighting fakes. So it's kind of a double icon in this kind of story of how fakes have been being policed. And, I would at no point make any particular certain comment about the presence of fake drugs or not. That is really beyond of what I would be able to claim. But I'm really interested in the way in which Nigeria has played itself onto the international stage. It has been crucially involved at the WHO level in setting up at the time the anti-counterfeit task force, which collaborated with the pharma industry, with the WTO, and made sure that this issue became really, as I mentioned before, really received a lot of attention internationally. And you have a very famous Minister of Health who's been driving this ahead and who acted locally, regionally, as well as internationally. And when the WHO turned its back on the anti-counterfeiting efforts, there was a huge disappointment in Nigeria, because also what it meant that this kind of the claim to health, which came with the involvement of the WHO, was withdrawn. And what it became was much more of a question of international property law, of criminality, and so forth. But nevertheless, Nigeria went ahead and in regional and other kind of coalitions carried on the fight against counterfeit medication in a very, very prominent way. And I think that is in the kind of narrative, in the kind of institutional narrative, Nigeria plays a very important role here. And that's what I think is, this is a narrative which has a history by now. This is a narrative which is formed in different places. In each of these countries, India and Nigeria, they have been given a certain significance in a often very stereotypical narrative about fake drugs. So Nigeria is the victim and is fighting against it. And India is often seen as the kind of perpetrator who produces a lot of the fake drugs. And I think what we're trying to do in our project is to kind of take apart these rather simplistic versions of what certain places stand for.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the comment. I wonder if we might also, again, take a step back and have a sort of quick round set of answers to the question of who profits from concerns about fake drugs. And is it, in fact, the consumer who is able to engage, in a sense, as James's question points out, and better evaluate products in the market? Or is it someone else who profits? Or is it actually a number of different people? I wonder, Dr. Pupukunani, based where you are in Harare, if you might be able to give us a very kind of quick overview from who do you think profits from concerns about fake drugs and in what ways? And you're muted, so please unmute yourself.
All right, thanks. So you must understand the context within which Zimbabwe, is experiencing these things. So Zimbabwe is still recovering, or perhaps is still having serious economic challenges. I mean, there have been episodes from perhaps 2000, but it's still facing a lot of economic challenges, and because of that, in terms of, in comparative terms, the Zimbabwean people are poorer. Salaries are relatively lower, especially when we compare with our neighbors. So there's a lot of people that are leaving the country in search for so-called greener pastures. So this is a space where unemployment is high, and people try to find to survive in these informal spaces. And selling of drugs that are not registered, so to speak, including sex drugs or sex enhancers or sex tonics, is one of those lucrative activities. Now, as people are flocking in this space, you have a law that is hanging, right? That has banned these sex drugs, over the counter selling of sex drugs. And from the feeling I get when I'm doing this research, this law is no longer relevant. In fact, it doesn't serve its objective, and it was put there 2013. But why does this still exist? Because the rationale or the thing was that sex tonics are substandard, or they are not they're unhealthy, and so forth and so forth. And I mean, there are a whole lot of stories around them. And but the reality is that, in fact, if it looks like the uptake is actually expanded since the ban. And yet, despite evidence of increased use, increased participation, increased existence of informal, buying and selling of sex tonics, that law still exists. And why is that? For me, it's because there are people who are benefiting from that, directly or indirectly. First and foremost, when we have these being sold in the informal space, already there's tax evasion. But perhaps more importantly are the busts, right? So you have occasional drug busts by city authorities. City authorities do their busts under the guise of when you sell stuff without a city license to sell. All right. Then you have the police. They have a drug section when you sell unlicensed drugs. So they can do a combined bust, the police with the city council. But sometimes it's just the police. Sometimes it's just the city council. Sometimes it's official. Sometimes it's unofficial. Sometimes it's official and unofficial, if I can call it that. So they've advised to go on the bus, but then they've a lot of leeway and liberty of how they are going to operate there, and so it's not I mean it's not unusual for these police and city authorities to make these occasional visits and they get some tokens. It's almost like people are paying some tax. So in this economy, there's a lot of benefit through surveillance that you make because if really it was about ending these things, this is something that can happen in a click. I mean, we've seen
Okay.
COVID-19 when they were trying to do lockdowns. I mean, they would just come and force the lockdowns and people. But with these things, they come today, a minute, a few hours later, the people are back in the streets, and
Right.
next day,
Okay.
and so on. So forth. Yes.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Thakur, speaking to us from Lucknow in India, what is your assessment of who benefits from concerns about fake drugs?
I think there are a lot of different kinds of people who. So, in the story that I had narrated, Sandeep benefited because he would be able to share that the drugs are fake, and so he would be able to, make the company go into loss by spreading the rumors that those drugs are fake. That is basically his revenge. That's how he's going to benefit. The other people who benefit, as told to me by the distributors and traders, are the regulatory authorities who come to India for different expos. And when they come here, they decide whose hospitality has been great. And so they would be giving them the approvals, and the rest are going to be fake. So again, the regulatory authorities here, they benefit a lot. Sometimes at the port, the customs officials would not clear your parcel unless and until you pay them a certain amount. For example, as told to me by a trader, he had to pay $100 in Cambodia to get his drugs, perfect drugs, not fake, enter the country. So this time, the customs officials, in a way, benefit from the circulation of so-called fake drugs, and they're able to also propagate that since there are fake drugs, they need to investigate what kind of drugs can enter. So I think there are various kinds of people who benefit from fake drugs,
Okay.
including pharmacies.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. I want to come back to something that a number of you have said about how what the project is not researching is the sort of pharmacological components or makeup of specific medicines. Can you tell us a bit more? So you've told us about what you're not doing. Can you just rehearse for us all in a nutshell actually what your research is comprised of, what activities you do, and how that's perhaps distinct from some of the research that came earlier and really that sought to establish fake drugs as a major and urgent health problem. Zoe, would you like to start us off?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. So I think the thing that really distinguishes our project is that we're actually talking to people, right? Like we are interested in what real, normal, living, breathing human beings are saying about fake drugs, right? Whether they work in regulatory agencies, in pharmacies, in hospitals, or if they're just walking around on the streets or, going about their daily business in particular areas of Harare, working for police forces, whoever they may be, we're interested more than in the pharmacological element, but in unpacking like what is being said about fakes. Who is making claims to fakeness, and what are the effects of those claims? So it's really studying claims in different contexts, and also really mapping how those claims might change across different contexts.
Okay, that's very helpful. Julia Hornberger, coming to us from Johannesburg, do you want to elaborate? I mean, what is it that you have actually done? Because it doesn't sound like you've been working as a pharmacologist, and it also doesn't sound like you've been working with kind of large data sets. Perhaps there's something I've missed, and might you fill us in?
So my work for the quite a few years now has been to work very closely with the police, as they have been charged with this new task of policing fake medication, which put them suddenly in the business of policing health. And I've been very interested in what, and this leads us to the previous question of like, what does it do to the police? And the police has actually gained a lot from that, and that is like Usha pointed out, new possibilities of asking for bribes and taking tax from people, but it also kind of given them a new kind of status, because the police is often not recognized very much by the people, but suddenly working for the health of the people gives them a kind of new veneer, and they kind of happily embrace that. So the work I've done is on all kind of levels. So I looked at the role of the police teaming up with the WHO at one point. This was more Interpol. The training then, which was developed, I looked at the training which was carried out across Africa among police officers, and I've kind of followed in a very anthropological, ethnographic mode South African police officers who are commercial crime police officers who are now these days charged with IP crimes. And as part of that, they're also doing the policing of counterfeit medication. And so I followed them, I spoke to them, and I saw what they claimed to be doing and what they were actually doing, and the very interesting connection between the claims and the actual practice between them. So
so can I just clarify? It sounds like when you were first talking that you're actually studying policies in an abstract way, but then by the end, you seem to be painting a different picture. So what does your day-to-day research consist of? Like, where might you go for your research? Who might you talk to? So do you mainly sit in libraries? I guess that's my question.
No, absolutely not. I was finally sitting in the library when I worked through the WHO archives. But before that, I was always more on the street with police officers, or I was joining them during conferences they were attending and conferences they were giving where they were being trained. But I wasn't just looking at the training itself. I was also looking at the conversation during lunch and dinners, the conversation during over the beer at the end of the conference, and the kind of jokes which were being told about, for example, fake Viagra, or raids they carried out, and who they caught and who they didn't catch. And these kind of really the world of policing in relationship, the everyday world of policing in its relationship to this new task to find the fake medications.
That's very helpful. That clears that up. And Ushuwedu Kufukuranani, can you again so you're basically doing policy too. You're sitting in libraries. Is that right? And you have to unmute yourself.
Not me. Yeah, or perhaps not yet. So far, it's been an exciting anthropological, work. I spend time with the traders. A lot of time
in their offices. So you kind of go to their offices and
these are in the streets. They're in the streets. They're in the streets every day. So this is the Avenues, which is a red light district for a while. So it is very convenient. Though, of course, in the city, you also have people in different spots that are selling different drugs, including sex tonics. In fact, just yesterday, I had a lady approaching me selling a bunch of those. So it can be anywhere. But I chose specifically this red light district where there are dozens of traders. On a good day, you may have something like 40 in the streets and so forth. So I just have a group that I hang out with, and then we get to get the stories
Okay.
about these things.
That's fascinating. And Dr. Tucker, can you tell us about who are the people you're talking to? Please, at least be the one person who's sitting in our library.
So I have been working with traders, different kind of
Okay.
traders like textile, diamonds, and since past 2 years, I have
Mm,
been speaking with pharmaceutical traders in the pharmaceutical business and distributors. But unfortunately, yes, sitting in my library because
mm,
it was COVID pandemic, and
uh,
unfortunately, I couldn't go and
mm,
meet them in person.
mm,
However, I was able to connect with them on LinkedIn. I was able to connect with them through various Google phone numbers and websites. And I have been trying to understand their perspective of fake because I'm sure they want to eliminate fakes so that their drugs are sold first. And so I have been trying to understand what is their perception of fake pharmacologically, what is their perception of fake through labels. And yeah, it's been quite fascinating to learn that it is very different from what I expected a fake medicine to be compared to what they think a fake medicine is.
mm. And it sounds like you've all had the experience of feeling that the people you're working with have been very open with you, because what one often reads in the literature uh, alarming us about fake drugs is that this is a hidden enterprise and primarily a criminal enterprise. Have any of you come across that in your research? Can perhaps Dr. Goodman, can we start with you?
I think there's certainly the perception that there's a lot of corrupt powers that be that are involved in the production of fakes. But this is usually, at least in my experience, less like the stereotypical image of the evil fraudster and more the state. For example, I just heard the story that the Zanzibari government, for example, is producing fake PCR tests for people to leave Zanzibar in order to, they say they produce these fake tests that actually show that people are positive, test positive for COVID. In order to keep people in Zanzibar for longer, they have to spend more money there. They basically bring more dollars into the Zanzibari economy. So there's definitely a strong perception that there's money being made in all of this, and that there's a lot of criminality, but it's not the kind of it's not the evil fraudster that is benefiting as much as the corrupt and structurally inefficient state, I would say.
Okay, Julia, what's your take to that question? Have you come across criminal elements? I mean, you're working with the police, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, I could tell a long story about one of those raids where we ended up where police were quite hyped up and they were getting ready, and they're keen to say, they're saying tonight you're going to see the big bust, and we ended up at a house with a family with two little kids who were in that case actually reproducing DVDs, and I could see how the mythology of the police were deflating at that moment, and realizing that once again, it was just people trying to make a living, and that this didn't fit necessarily in the kind of story of organized crime supplementing their income through fake drugs and all kind of other fake goods. So it's always when you really put the finger on it, it often seems to dissolve quite rapidly these narratives of high crime, organized crime.
Okay. And Ushe, any criminals?
Absolutely not. I mean, these are ordinary people who are trying to make ends meet. I mean, they celebrate a profit of $5 and tell you that they have now just gotten money to pay for this and that and that, and they're happy. And it's not organized crime. It's not that. I mean, it's the few opportunity available for them, and they're trying to make money. Not the things a decent way.
Okay, thank you. And Nishpriya Thakur, what about from you? Any criminals?
So I recently had a party at home, and two of my friends. They were discussing their sugar levels because both are unfortunately diabetic. So one of them shared that, oh, I'm taking metformin, and the other one said, oh, but I'm taking some other medicine. And the other one said, how come your medicine is so cheap? And she said, because my doctor is not a criminal. So the other one said, oh, really? Um, so she actually used the word gunda, which means, criminal
A
in
thug, yeah.
English. Yeah. And the other one said, oh, yeah, maybe my doctor gave me this kind of medicine. Perhaps he's a criminal, he's been taking money from me. And the other woman said, well, we don't know. The pharmacist could have given you an expensive version, so he might be the criminal. You never know.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, so what, with an eye to the time, it seems like we might sum up. Thank you all, audience, for your comments and your interventions. I think what the takeaway is that rather than needing to guard against the potential dangers looming from every nook and cranny of bad drugs that are unsafe and might make us unwell rather than to cure us, it sounds like actually the concerns about fake drugs themselves could be harmful to health in terms of us limiting our own access to medicine that is in particular safe and affordable. Sounds like it's a very complicated state of affairs, and indeed the work that you've been doing goes some way in helping dispel what frankly come across in light of your research as myths that are only able to be sort of shaken not by continually looking at data sets or policy documents, but actually by going on the ground and talking to the people who are involved in the policing of so-called counterfeit medications, who are involved in distributing it globally, selling it, and those who are at the kind of face of having to evaluate what in fact is the right decision for them in their healthcare. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you, Dr. Zoe Goodman from the University of Warwick, Professor Julia Hornberger from the University of the Svadostrand in Johannesburg, Dr. Ushueru Kufakuranani from the University of Warwick, and Dr. Nishpriya Thakur, also from the University of Warwick. I'm Sarah Hodges, and until next time, we hope you've all learned how to make fake drugs.